Chap.
Okay. We seem to be. We on, Jim? Good, good. Well, this is the Cable Coffee Club again, and with us this morning we have what I'd trying to think, a seasoned team, I would suppose we could call them. My immediate left is the big boss of the Register News, my dad, J. Edwin Rackaway. And next to him is W.B. Carr, and I don't include you in the seasoned troops.
Thank you, sir.
And of course, our old favorite, Irene Purcell. And let me get this off right and say happy birthday.
Thank you, Chappie. Thank you. I'm 22 times 3 and a fraction.
I wasn't going to ask you which one it was. We're all gathered together here to talk about a subject that's on everybody's mind right now. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world to talk about. That's the big tornado of 46 years ago today, in 1925, that swept through southern Illinois. And I got Dad in here especially this morning because he was a hustling young reporter at that time and covered that story. Dad, would you like to start off and talk about some of what happened 46 years ago today?
Well, nearly everything happened. Southern Illinois was pretty near blown away. That's what happened. That is the worst tornado that ever hit the country. I think in damage and loss of life. Most of these tornadoes just touch down in a comparatively small area, like the one that hit Mount Vernon. It just tipped down here. But this tornado of 1925 swept clear across the state. It went from the Mississippi River to the Wabash. Started over in southeast Missouri and killed a few people over there and came across the river, swept clear across Illinois and wound up over in Indiana.
That was a...
It was a tornado that never lifted.
Let's find out. Caesar, were you alive and kicking at that time?
Yes,
Where were
Chappie.
you the day of the...
At that time, I was living in Benton, and I was a member of the Boy Scouts, Troop Number 1 of the Baptist Church. And I remember Dad worked for the Illinois Central at that time, and they had a tremendous loss of life at the little town of Aiken, just east of Benton. And they were bringing in these so-called cadavers, or dead people, and of course placing them in the freight depot for later identification. And then the next morning, our troop was recruited to go on duty.
Well, that's bringing you out of the young, tender age.
Oh,
Was that a
heavens,
gruesome
yes.
detail?
Especially since they put me in charge of a traffic detail, sending through all ambulances and police cars at just below the square in Benton. And the next day, I was given the chore of going down to a hospital in West Frankfort, and we had to sweep out the hospital.
Hmm.
And of course, there were several terribly wounded people there.
They must have recruited every able-bodied man, boy, and child.
They certainly did.
Says. Sally, you were, of course, too young during this time.
Thank you,
didn't-
Chappie. Thank
Were
you.
you in Sullivan, Illinois?
No, I was in Mattoon.
Mattoon.
And I remember reading about it, of course, and communications then were slower, naturally, but we read about it there, and it wasn't my first knowledge of a tornado, because in 1917, as I'm sure Mr. Rackaway will recall, half of Mattoon actually was just flattened with a tornado. And all joking aside, I was a teenager at that time, and like some teenagers today, I wasn't aware of the danger as I should have been. I went immediately out there, just as fast as my folks didn't know it. I rushed out to see what a tornado was like, and I certainly found out. You couldn't tell an alley from a street. There was just devastation everywhere. Straws driven into wood, chicken totally bare of their feathers, and one horrifying fact was a woman being actually crucified to a tree. There was a 2x4 would just nailed her there. That was a horrible thing, of course, and And that's the way it went with me. But back about 1925, which I want Mr. Rackaway to detail more thoroughly, I distinctly remember that, yes. Yes, it was
we've got
bannered all over the Journal Gazette there.
We've got a pleasant little conversation for people at breakfast and coffee
Yes.
here this
Well,
morning.
that's the way it goes.
I mean, there's nothing humorous or...
No,
That's the...
but that was a horrible thing. Naturally, at that age, it has always stuck in my mind. And as I said, at that time, I wasn't smart enough to realize how devastating and what a danger, because there was a second threat. Even as I was out there, there were live wires down, and of course, as I said, I wasn't smart enough. But back about 1925, I want Mr. Rackaway to tell us some more about that, because he has the first-hand information.
I grabbed from Orion's desk, Orion Metcalf upstairs, who incidentally wrote a heck of a good article on it in last night's
Yes, he
Rackaway.
did. Yes, he did. Very interesting.
Any of you that haven't read it yet, I recommend you read it.
I did.
But I have some photostats, Dad, of your front pages. This one happens to be of March the 19th. Tornado sweeps past of death and run across southern Illinois. Night of horror in storm-stricken area of southern Illinois. You undoubtedly wrote those at the time.
I don't remember back there. I got a call in the afternoon, about an hour or two after the thing struck in Chicago. The head of the AP up there, Associated Press, wanted me to go down there and go to work on it. I started down there, got my car, and got a couple of men from the Register News took along with me. First thing we got into was DeSoto down there, and there was a little town that had been there. It wasn't there anymore when we got there. The great big pile of red brick where there'd been a schoolhouse a few hours before with several hundred children in it, a big two-story brick building, a combined school there. And that thing just completely collapsed. It seemed like it fell in, according to what they told me, people around there. A cyclone will do that, makes a vacuum some way. It didn't blow down, it just balls fell in and killed and mangled those kids up there, something terrible. That was enough to make anybody sick.
And just for clarification purposes, I know you referred to it as a cyclone, and of course, tornado seems to be the term we use now. Is there any difference between a cyclone and a
Oh,
tornado?
I've heard that thing all my
The end result's about the same, isn't it?
Big high wind.
But older people refer to them as cyclone. And I think it's I really like the word seems more descriptive, cyclone.
Yes, I think so too.
True.
But I know most of the older people still use the word cyclone.
Uh-huh.
You talk about
1888, that was a cyclone.
these children from this school, there were several hundred in there. Those that weren't killed, they had to take them someplace. There wasn't any place to take them to DeSoto. That wasn't any DeSoto left.
Isn't that all?
And they took them down to DuQuoin, and they turned the Elks there in the Elks club room into a temporary hospital. And they didn't have time to get cots in, and they had blankets on the floor, and they had all these little mangled children that brought in there laid out in rows on the floor there. It was the most gruesome sight I ever saw in my life.
You gonna give us a little coffee, are you, Jim? Thank you.
I thought I was pretty hard boiled and could take anything, but that made me
Oh,
sick at my
that's
Too
stomach.
much for you, just too much for you.
I could, you drove, talking about driving your car down, that would have been excitement enough for me. I reckon you're driving the building, you'd knock Andy off.
I was a good driver.
I'll take the word for that.
I had one of those fresh air jobs, and I didn't have a top air coat either, like to froze to death before I got down there. It got
Incidentally,
cold.
what were you driving, Mr. Rackaway?
Oh,
What
I
car
had a
were you
big
driving?
old touring car, they used to call them. That was
Oh, yes.
before they had sedans much. And it was
Isinglass,
fresh air, like Amos and Andy's taxi cab. It was a fresh air job.
Yeah, fresh air job.
Orion tells me he was on that run down there.
The Orion went down.
He says you went non-stop, wouldn't stop for any reason,
Oh, I was
which
going down there.
we won't.
You got to get down in
Incidentally,
the
what time
cyclone
of day
zone,
did
you
that
couldn't
strike?
find out.
Pardon me.
We
What time
kept
of day did it
hearing over
strike,
there
Mr. Rackaway?
soon as we got to DuQuoin about what happened and what had happened over at West Frankfort, and they had some wild stories. You hear all kinds of rumors
Yes,
at a time
yes.
like that. You've got to check up on them because some
Yes.
of them may be true, you know. We could see a great big red glare in the sky over to the west. That was Murfreesboro. That was burning, and Murfreesboro was on fire.
My.
And the stories about West Frankfort, and I told Orion and Floyd Purcell was with me, the other man, to go and find out what the devil had happened over to West Frankfort and see what really happened over there. But West Frankfort got a break. They
had a
They just hit the north edge of the town.
That's right.
North, it killed a lot of people, it tore down houses, but if that thing had been just a little further south, it would have ripped right through the middle of that town, and no telling what would have happened there. It'd been like Murfreesboro, maybe worse.
Well, here in the paper, and by the way, Warren told me yesterday this was the first story he ever wrote for the Register News on the West Frankfort portion of the tornado.
He went over there.
102 dead over in West Frankfort.
Well, that was bad enough.
You
but
bet
then
it was.
There's nothing like what to been if that thing had been a little bit further south, quarter of a mile or a half mile further south, going right through the middle of that town.
Been hundreds then, wouldn't it? Just about taking the town, wouldn't it, Mr. Rackaway?
We had one here just a few years back, you know, that just skirted around the edge of Mount Vernon. If that had come over a little further this way, we'd have had another bad one.
Sally, you asked what kind of car he's driving when I took these photostats, the pictures and all. I noticed we have a car ad in here. It's the Overland all-steel sedan.
You better believe it.
You could purchase this world's lowest price four-door all-steel sedan for $715.
A bargain. Next to
Overland,
cranking them,
you
driving
had
them,
one.
can't you?
I got nearly all the breeds.
Shows you believed in buying something from one of your advertisers here.
I think this car went down there with a big old open-air Nash touring car, they called it.
Yeah, I can recall that old Nash.
Oh, you-
Well, that I was 5, 6 years old at the time. I'm very perceptive,
Had good
very
intent.
precocious young man.
They were good cars, and those Nashes off the market now, isn't it?
Yeah, they are.
Caesar's
They were all
kind of a car
crank
bug. He could probably name all those old the Stars and the Moons.
Oh, yes, the Dart, and the Rio, and the
Haynes.
Essex.
Essex.
The Essex. The Essex.
Still see those late
Haynes.
model Essex.
Oh, yeah, the Essex. I've seen
And the
them.
Lexington, I recall that.
The Chandler, I remember Mr. Elliott had that Chandler lived down the street from us. He'd come charging in and start kicking kids out of there when he'd come home. He had 10 or 12 years old, and we had about 50 in the neighborhood that all congregate down there.
Grandpappy of them all, though, was the Model T with that little hood way down here, and here you are up here, you
Yes.
know. Oh, my. Talk about open air. That was open
How
air.
do you know about those things?
Oh,
This year
yeah.
you're just 21 today, and
That's right. 22 times 3 and a fraction.
I was trying to think. Well, of course, I knew you was coming on today, Dad. That you've been in newspaper business about 60 years now, haven't you?
Yes, all of that.
Yeah. Looks like after 60 years you'd be almost ready for retirement. You're just getting broke in good. I noticed, glancing through these things, I noticed here in one of these stories about the Heron fire truck.
And that was the only humorous thing that happened. They had a brand new one. They went over to Murfreesboro. They sent a big, nice fire truck over there to help out at Murfreesboro, and it got trapped over there and burned up their fire truck.
No kidding.
The fire truck burned out. I'm getting some signals here. I imagine they're going to take a break. So as soon as they sell something, we'll be right back. I hope they can. And sad that we hadn't said anything about Hamilton County over there, who was also suffered quite a bit of damage and casualties. What were you saying about that, Dad?
Well, it went clear through Hamilton County and all through Franklin County, but in Hamilton County it didn't hit any settled place. There was a bunch of people killed there and a bunch of farm homes hit and farm homes destroyed and people killed, but no towns were hit. And down in Franklin County, pretty much the same thing. It didn't hit any place but except the north end of West Frankfort. It hit them pretty hard there.
I was glancing at this page here. Sally, you said you lived in Mattoon at the time. I can't read this story because it's too small, but
Yes.
I see a head here, newspaper at Mattoon closed by sheriff. It happened the
Yeah.
same day.
Well, I wonder
Close you up.
what...
What kind of deal were you running out there?
I wonder which one. They had two there for a while.
I can't
They had the,
read it. It's too small to read. I
Closed
know
by the sheriff.
that's what it says here. I can't see the
Maybe
deal.
there's probably something.
We had some
fancy
newspapers around here
fine.
closed for the sheriff.
They're bootlegging on the side.
Maybe so.
The creditors closing in on them.
Yeah.
Dad, I noticed, talking on the brighter side of the thing, that Mount Vernon was working hard on getting relief and send help down to the people. I noticed that we ran front page boxes about relief meeting the courthouse tonight at 7:30, and some smaller type I can't read, and Have a Heart coming to help raise, can't see it, goods or something, I
Yeah,
can't see it.
Mount Vernon always been that way ever since they had the big cyclone here. The people all over the country sent stuff into Mount Vernon and sent relief here, and the older Mount Vernon people always remembered that whenever there was a cyclone any place around, tornado any place around, why they always pitched in and raised some relief here. They'd send them food and clothing and money because they all felt they'd help Mount Vernon out when it was laying flat on the ground.
I notice here the be 2 days after the disaster that Mount Vernon starts relief fund with $3,000. So $3,000 was a pretty good start to help people. See, I doubt if many people at that time carried insurance to the extent they do now.
Oh, heavens, no. Oh, of
I
course
mean, everybody finances their home now, and it's mandatory that you have it insured.
Certainly.
But in those days, I doubt if there was.
Very, very little
You wouldn't,
insurance,
of course, there wouldn't be any reason.
Everybody
for
in
you.
Mount Vernon takes tornadoes.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yes.
We're in the middle of this cyclone belt.
But you wouldn't have any reason to know. You wouldn't know what the claims amounted to on that period.
No, not at that time, Chap. I was too young.
Could you give us any idea what the amount on our 57 tornado,
That was around $2.5 million.
the $2.5
Oh,
million, and
My, actually.
In
Yes.
Mount Vernon here?
Yes.
so, you know, if the scope and magnitude of this thing, if insurance had been,
Well, on today's market, it would have been probably $50 million.
I think in one of these places here that I saw something about somebody tried to appraise the property loss in dollars, thing, some place.
Whenever they have a tornado that hit a town of any size, they nearly always have bad fire. It starts a lot of fires, of course. They had it. I guess Murfreesboro was damaged more by the fire than it was by the tornado.
What time did it hit, Mr. Rackaway? Day or night? What was that? Was
Well,
it
it was
a
in
night
the-
thing?
As I recall, it was in the afternoon,
Yeah,
about
afternoon.
3:30, wasn't it?
Yeah. The school wasn't out yet down there.
Oh,
The school,
oh,
it was before 4 o'clock.
Yes, if it had those kids scattered out, probably saved lots of
Saved
lives.
a lot of lives.
I
Yeah.
recall being in grade school in Benton at the time, and at the time that the cloud went over, and we had hailstones as large as baseballs in the schoolyard. Fortunately, school was still in session,
Wasn't there an eagle blowed in from somewhere?
Jack, I'll take your word there's an eagle blown in, but don't ask me to verify.
Oh, that's made it.
You hear so many stories after
Yes,
these
you do.
things. and
Surely.
Yes, you do.
On that 57 tornado here, Clarence Pearson was telling me something about a dog in a doghouse down here west of town. It blew away and took the dog
Uh-huh.
a week to walk home or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
I don't recall. But after everyone seems to have been right in the center of the eye
yeah,
of the
wild
thing time it
stories.
was over, and possibly most of them that were aren't around to tell about it.
Well, in 1957, Chappie, I had the same lack of awareness that I had in 1917. I didn't know what was happening here until I heard the wind whistling, went to the kitchen window, and I saw the debris coming down. And I still didn't know what was going on, and I called the Register News. I heard more sirens than we have ambulances. So I talked to my husband, now deceased. I said, there's got to be something going on here. Called the Register News, and Clara Crowder answered the phone and told me what had taken place. So the next day, that was my first experience behind the lines in a newspaper under stress. Up until that, I'd only been here 2 years, to be sure, but then it had been day in and day out. But then I saw newspaper men in action, and I knew what it took. They had been up all night, but it made no difference. They were there all day. And I stood there from 7:45 until 3 o'clock in the afternoon trying to get pictures made for the paper, and finally the paper was full and would hold no more, and they didn't, you just want to say they didn't have to tell the story of, well, because there just wasn't room. And finally, after 3 o'clock, they made it to press. And one of Mr. Rackaway's all too infrequent editorials appeared the next day, a very moving account of what had happened. He commended Orion Metcalf and Guy Henry, his son John, for their splendid work. And I say again, his infrequent editorials. I'm not alone in thinking that the paper would be richer if we had more of them, yet today we missed that. We missed that.
I will hardly agree with that.
Don't you really now?
Can't do
Don't
much
you
of the
really?
boss. You can't tell him to do much.
I know that. We can't tell him what. Some of them were highly amusing. Long before I had ever hoped to meet Mr. Rackaway, Glenn and I would be convulsed with some of them, and others, they were in a serious vein, but always interesting. But this one was particularly moving and impressive. And as usual, as Mr. Rackaway so aptly put it one time, if you can use a 10-cent word, don't reach for one that's 50 cents. He expresses himself as a veteran and capable newspaperman does in language that the likes of myself can understand.
Certainly.
But it was, you probably remember it, Mr. Carr.
Oh,
It was
yes,
right
quite
in the
well.
center of the front page.
Mhm.
Let's get a little more informal. That's Caesar.
Thank you. I feel much better.
He's the boy
Well, I
of the
didn't want him to
program.
think that I was trying to be an old woman flirting with him, because before we were on the air, I commended him on the beauty of this jacket he was wearing. Then I started calling him Caesar, good heavens.
I asked you to wear hot pants. They were all right.
Well, Chappie, I'll tell you, as beautiful and sexy as I am, I just couldn't do that.
Get into
I
the
didn't
hot
want to
plate.
devastate the panel.
That's the new fashion, Dad.
Yes,
that
I
is.
know.
I'm an old-fashioned boy.
Comedy relief, you can't beat some of them I've seen on television.
Well, getting back to this thing, every section of the country is cursed with some kind of. California has an earthquake.
Yes.
And talking of earthquakes, that little shake we had here a few years ago was the most frightening.
Yes.
It would seem even the tornado, have some idea you want to get someplace, and an
Yeah.
earthquake, I don't know what in the world you do. You just grab the arm of
no
your chair
warning.
and hang on.
Yeah. That was another time when I had no idea. I'd never been near an earthquake. I was at the hospital at the time because Glenn was quite ill at that time. But Glenn, sick as he was, recognized it for what it was. And still trying to hang on as a newspaper woman, I was retired then. I grabbed the phone, nothing. And my thought was that maybe some oxygen had exploded out there, which it could do. It has done other places, not here. But, and then the emergency doors went closed, and I thought, what is going on here? Well, eventually I found out. And it was a frightening thing, and they tell me we're threatened with another one just any time. That's a cheerful thought, too.
It isn't.
I don't think we've got the dangers they apparently have out in California.
No.
Everybody's been predicting for years they're gonna go back
Go into the
Oh,
ocean.
yes. Well, they have them every once in a while out there.
on that fault line there.
Yeah, there's been repeated tremors since the big one here a while back.
I hadn't noticed
Yeah,
too
a
many.
couple, I believe, they said, they reported, but mild, but mild.
I noticed one of the stories here, Dad, that all the Mount Vernon doctors were, of course, majority of them were rushed
Yeah,
down.
the Red Cross issued a call. That's the first thing they did for doctors. And I was down and was telling them about DuQuoin, where they had all these little mangled children laid out in rows on the floor in the Elks home. There's a couple of Mount Vernon doctors down there. Old Dr. Jimmy Hamilton, Dr. Morris Maxey. I run into them down there. They'd answered the call. The Red Cross, they send out a call. All doctors report that get away.
I've heard you tell a story on Uncle Walter there, ran the drugstore down here at the time, maybe. That was always kind of interesting to me.
He had a wholesale narcotic license, and the only one around here. And of course, with all those hospitals full and all that, they was wanting morphine, and doctors were yelling for it, and the hospitals were yelling for it, and they wanted him to release it. And of course, he had to count for every grain of it he had and have stuff in triplicate. And he's afraid to let it go, but he knew those people needed it. They really needed it. And he got a hold of some fellow in the narcotic office over in St. Louis, some bureaucrat over there, and he wouldn't give him any satisfaction about what he should do. And got another fellow in Chicago, and he wouldn't stick his neck out, said, I can't tell you anything what to do. And finally got a hold of a fellow down in Washington that had some sense. And he said, I've heard what's happened out there, this fellow in Washington did. We've heard about what's happened in southern Illinois. He said, you release that morphine, said, give it to the Red Cross. Let your Red Cross chairman sign for it in your county. And I don't think anybody's going to accuse the Red Cross of being a dope peddling institution.
I would.
And I'll send you a letter in the morning when I get down to the office. I'll write you a letter and say that I authorize you to let it go. And he turned it loose without any, turned it over to the Red Cross. When I got back that night, he said, you better kiss me goodbye. I may be on the way to the federal prison. All that morphine loose. Well, I said, I don't think so. It's a time of emergency. You got to drop some of these rules and regulations in a time like that.
No time to be technical, all
Do
that.
something.
right.
So,
This is where we're seated right now. It'd probably be one of the safest places in case of a bad storm. That's the old press room here, so we're
Right.
surrounded by
Right.
6 feet of concrete here on all sides. And take
I
the-
was telling, as you said, call him Caesar. I was telling Caesar when we were down in the studio that there should have been before and after pictures taken of this. There really should have. It's so magnificent now, and naturally before it was quite clean. It had to be for the
Yeah, we use it for
purpose of
store
utility.
paper in there. And,
yes. Couldn't call it attractive, but it's certainly most attractive now.
Talking about being pretty nice looking downstairs, if any organization got some worthwhile project and if they'd contact us down here and like to come in and have coffee and donuts with us some morning, well, we'd love to have them down. That's the purpose of the program, to find out what's going on in the community and see if we can help them. I get it. That means wind it up, does it? So I want to thank all three of you for coming down. We'll like to get you back sometime and talk about something probably a little more pleasant than this. But these things have to be discussed occasionally, so kind of learn from the past, and all of us.
It's been quite interesting, Chap. Thanks for
I've
the
enjoyed
invitation.
it greatly. Enjoyed it.
If
So I said before, try to nail your father down on a promise to come back and review his career as a newspaper man. I want to hear it, and I'm not alone in that. I want to hear it.
I think it'd be interesting. Dad's an old actor. He's kind of a ham. He
Yes, by the way, I'm glad you mentioned that. You know what, Glenn always called your father the man who came to dinner because he starred in that and did so well. Glenn said, I saw the man who came to dinner when and Mr.
Yeah.
Rackaway and Glenn's birthday was on the same day.
I see.
Jack, you
Yes.
can just wrap us up any time. Where's it?
Be watching tomorrow morning at 9:30 for Cable Coffee Break. Your host, Register News Business Manager Chap Rackaway. Cable Coffee Break is an experiment in programming by the Register News and Sullivan Cable Systems. If you like the program on at 9:30 through this Friday, let us know. Or if you don't like it, let us know anyway. Our phone number is 242-0113.
The union's man at General Motors said, as of now, we are on a collision course, adding that he would recommend that General Motors become the union's first strike target when contracts expire in 2 weeks. The Census Bureau said today that according to its preliminary results in the 1970 census, the population of New York City has dropped about 10,000 in the past 10 years. But census officials pointed out that some people are still to be accounted for, such as those presently abroad, and the final tabulation may well show a slight increase in the New York City population. According to the preliminary figures, California has replaced New York as the most populated state by 1,700,000. The national population was put at about 205 million. Thank you. Thank you.
You have to cue him every time you go out and in, don't you? Huh? He's going to be watching you because we don't have a camera light. Right? Or it'd be the same way when we're ready to snap our finger.
Okay.
Go.
Good evening. This is the 6 o'clock report, and I'm Orion Metcalf. This evening, Gene Simpson and Doug Sefton cover the latest cop shooting and its shock waves. Jerome Wilson counts Senate noses on the Hatfield-McGovern vote. Bob Young reports on King Hussein's near assassination and the rest of the Mideast story. Robert Potts talks to the city's new school boss and previews the coming class year. And Craig Spence talks about the Big Brother computers with the chief of Nader's Raiders. Scott Osborne weighs Brownsville's garbage crisis. Frank Gifford has the sports. Gordon Barnes the weather. And Leonard Harris with part 2 of his special report on the upcoming theater season, Broadway 70. Vice President Agnew cut short his Honolulu rest stop by 1 day today to brief President Nixon and his top advisors on Nixon's 5-nation tour of Asia. Agnew is also sitting in on a top secret meeting at the San Clemente White House on the Middle East. The White House refers to that meeting as a general review, but it does come amid increasingly angry Israeli charges of Egyptian violation of the current ceasefire by allegedly moving up SAM missiles closer to the Suez Canal. Detroit's Big Three today offered the United Auto Workers what the companies call their biggest wage and benefit package in history. A 3-year contract they estimated would cost $3 billion. But the UAW's Chrysler man called the offer ridiculous. He said it contained none of the elements the union asked. The union's man at General Motors said, as of now, we are on a collision course, adding that he would recommend that General Motors become the union's first strike target when the contract expires in 2 weeks. The Census Bureau said today that according to its preliminary results in the 1970 census, the population of New York City has dropped about 10,000 in the last 10 years. But census officials pointed out that some people are still to be accounted for, such as those presently abroad, and the final tabulation may well show a slight increase in the New York City population. According to the preliminary figures, California has replaced New York as the most populated state by 1,700,000, and the national population was put at about 205 million. Dr. Harvey Scribner was installed today as the first chancellor of the New York City public school system under the new school decentralization bill. In 2 weeks, more than 1 million city school children go back to classes for the 1970-71 school year. Education editor Robert Potts examines many of the problems that Dr. Scribner will face in his new post. Police came under fire in 3 separate boroughs during the night, and the rising tide of violence aimed at police brought an emergency meeting between Mayor Lindsay and Police Commissioner Howard Larry. In Queens, the windshield of a police car was shattered by a bullet fired by 3 men fleeing from an alleged robbery attempt against a Frankfurter salesman. In Harlem, bullets missed 2 policemen chasing 3 suspects in a shooting. In Brooklyn, a patrolman was shot in the arm in the Mill Basin section where he was investigating reports of gunfire. Gene Simpson reports. There seemed nothing much to be done today as the toll of policemen assaulted by attackers continues to mount. The buddy system, or 2-man patrol, might deter some would-be assassins, but there have been numerous instances in which police teams have been attacked. A suggestion by PBA President Edward Kiernan says that radio cars should be equipped with shotguns, but this was rejected by Police Commissioner Howard Larry as not necessary at this time. While no one pretended to have an answer, Mayor Lindsay made an unusual visit to police headquarters where he was briefed on the emergency for 35 minutes by Larry and top police brass. At a news conference afterward, the possibility of a conspiracy to murder policemen was raised. It's hard to say how long the buddy system can be maintained. Commissioner Larry conceded that the doubling up in some areas meant other sections would be left without police protection. More men might solve it, but there are openings for only 304 additional patrolmen in New York City under the quota and no plans to go on from there. In Chatham, New Jersey, a patrolman was the subject for a gunman who fired from a car when the policeman signaled for him to lower his headlights from high beam, and Patrolman James McCart said that the bullet went past his head. He gave chase in his police car, but the motorist gunman managed to escape. And in Philadelphia, bail for 14 Black Panthers arrested following a shootout by police was fixed at $100,000 each when a judge reversed his earlier decision to lower the bail to $500 on a writ of habeas corpus. An attorney for the Panthers said that he would continue to make efforts to have the bail released. I'll have a report on Capitol Hill action on the Vietnam War when the 6 o'clock war report continues. A convention of computer experts got underway today at the New York Hilton with consumer crusader Ralph Nader as the key speaker. Before his speech, Nader talked with Craig Spence and other reporters, while the computers on display nearby looked on and hummed their ominous mute chorus in the background. Nader said that despite his criticism of the computer industry, he did not plan to make it a target for his campaign against other industries. Well, the Mets work out with an eye on the scoreboard, and an old champ climbs back into the ring. Frank Gifford has the story and the rest of the day in sports after the following message.
Thank you, Laureate, and good evening. Well, the Mets cooled off the Cardinals last night to tighten up the National League East. And tonight, as they get ready to go up against the Cardinals' Bob Gibson, they may play scoreboard at Busch Stadium. The Cubs, a game off the lead and another half game ahead of the Mets, were in action against the Phillies, the only daytime action in either league. The Mets have a new man in uniform tonight, veteran reliever Ron Herbel from San Diego. That was one of several moves by pennant contenders last night. The Pirates picked up left-hander George Brunet from Washington, and the California Angels, perhaps with an eye on Minnesota, came up with outfielder Tony Gonzalez from Atlanta. At the stadium, the Yanks send Fritz Peterson against Baltimore tonight. This afternoon, they took shortstop Ron Hansen off the disabled list. One other baseball development, the suspension of Detroit pitcher Denny McLain reduced from up to 30 days to 7, meaning McLain will be back in a Tiger uniform Saturday. McLain's latest run-in with the club came last Friday, when he doused 2 newsmen with buckets of ice water and then said there was nothing in his contract that said he couldn't do it. In golf, it was Doug Sanders against Carol Mann head-to-head at Grossinger's this afternoon, and Sanders took care of women's lib all by himself. He beat the lady by 12 shots, his 73 against her 85, for a $2,500 purse, and the lady pros may never get over the shock. In pro football, the Giants brought their roster to the required 49 last night by dropping punter Dave Dunaway and placing defensive back Jimmy Hollifield and rookie Dwayne Miller on injured waivers. At Belmont, the International Steeplechase Handicap went to Top Bird, part of the winning entry, paying $3.80. The Daily Double, Noble Dispatch, and Aries Solo, numbers 7 and 9, returned $78. I'll have a look at a man on the comeback kick in a minute when the 6 o'clock report continues. Well, score one for Muhammad Ali. After 3 years of enforced idleness, the man without a title gets to fight on a formal basis, though they are billed as exhibitions. 2 4-rounders have been scheduled for Muhammad in Atlanta against a couple of unknowns. And in Miami's 5th Street Gym, run by former fight referee Angelo Dundee, Bob Halloran asked the old champ about prospects for a real return. Muhammad Ali, who is, at least, still quick with the quip and weighing 221, he's not very much out of shape either. That's the sports. Orion will be back with more news after this message.
In film movies forming into fantastic designs, but they're probably too young to remember that Berkeley did something more for the New York stage. He was and is a connoisseur of girls. Robert Potts reports. Tonight, art editor Leonard Harris has the second part of a 4-part special report, Theater 70, and he takes a look at the increasing difficulty of a straight play, comedy or drama, making it on Broadway. Tomorrow, in part 3 of his special report, Leonard Harris looks at the big moneymaker and the big risk on Broadway, the musical. Stock prices dropped sharply today in moderate trading, sending the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 6.43. A transportation issue fell 1.30, and utilities fell 0.42. The New York Stock Exchange Index dropped 29 cents on a volume of nearly 10.5 million shares. The American Exchange Index was down 4 cents as more than 2.25 million shares were traded. Well, that's the 6 o'clock report. Stay tuned for a WCBS TV editorial, followed by the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. I'm Orion Metcalf. Good evening.
In activities of community concern, who give their time